Welcome to BIV Daily, the podcast from the newsroom of business in Vancouver. I'm Kirk LaPointe, publisher and editor-in-chief. We're on the cusp of hearing about economic recovery plans from senior levels of government. Ought to be the next couple of weeks, I would imagine. And they've been hearing from business and other interest groups about the approach to take in bringing Canada out of the throes of the worst of the pandemic's impact. The BC Chamber of Commerce has proposed nothing short of a 54-point plan. We're going to discuss it today. We won't get to all 54 points, I don't think, but we'll get to quite a few of them with Dan Baxter. He's the Chamber's Director of Policy Development and Government and Stakeholder Relations. Good to have you with us.
Thanks, Kirk. Pleasure to be here.
I think the Chamber, like a lot of organizations, starts with its own research on this one. In your case, you surveyed many of your, I think, 36,000 businesses that are part of the Chamber. Yeah. In general, what did you hear?
Yeah, just talk about great timing. We've been about a year and a half, 2 years into a new insight platform called BC Mindreader, and it's a insight cloud-based insight platform that allows us to really go out to our membership and actually gauge what's on their mind in as close to real time as possible. So we've been doing this since March, and obviously I think what we're hearing is 65% of businesses need to have some sort of government support or have been relying on government support. And of course, 3 out of 10 are worried that when those supports go away, they might not or won't be able to return to normal operations. So we really try to dive into that and understand exactly what kind of supports they need to get back on their feet and get back to some semblance of normal and have some healthy form of prosperous growth in the future. So that's where we, looking at asking some questions, tax relief came number one with 39% of businesses saying they need tax relief of some form. When you look at that, we're eliminating the PST at 16%, some sort of mitigation of EHT, employers' health tax at 10%. Then, of course, transportation infrastructure, retraining, reskilling, came in as well. So that's how we tried to develop this plan, is with those kinds of needed supports in mind, and that's how we came up with these 54 recommendations.
Yeah, I mean, we're on the cusp of some immediate changes here, aren't we? I mean, with the wage subsidy alone, we're going to get some very different formula being applied here in the next number of weeks. When you gauge the degree of apprehension and anxiety among business right now in British Columbia, how hot is it?
It's up there. We obviously just came through a round. Like a lot of businesses have had to scale back operations. They've put a lot of their employees onto temporary furlough, and of course there is legislative requirements that you have to bring those employees back within a certain amount of time before they're considered severed or dismissed. And of course that means severance might have to be paid out. So of course, obviously we got the government to extend that out several weeks. And of course, now we're coming up to a deadline, actually in 4 days. If they don't apply for a variance, that might kick in. And of course, we've been saying to the government, thankfully they've created a more streamlined online portal to take care of that process, and hopefully businesses can utilize it. But one of the issues is that you have to put a date of return before the end of the year. And of course, we were saying, like, our data is telling us 3 out of 10 or 29% of businesses aren't likely to bring back their employees before the end of the year. It's just, that's how much uncertainty is out there right now with businesses as they try to navigate this slow and fragile recovery before them.
Yeah, it's slow and fragile, I think, is the term that a lot of people are using right now, which is don't make any grand assumptions about how quickly things can come back. And for all we know, there may be setbacks here along the way. No one's been able to safely predict all of this. So what kind of certainty are businesses looking for right now from senior levels of government?
Yeah, I think there's the immediate, supports that still are in place. So it's good to know that we have the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy extended out to the end of the year. Now, granted, there's going to be some different ways to access it depending on your level of revenue loss. But that has been the most uptake program that's been uptake by business. So the fact that goes until December now, and it's actually now open to all businesses that have revenue loss. Before, it used to be 30% or more, which was actually quite challenging, because a lot of businesses would say, hey, I'm at 25%. And that's a massive hit for my business. Like, it's making it really uncertain where we can support.
Yeah. Especially if they were having to raise prices in the meantime, which might be disguising that revenue loss,
Well, that's exactly it. So I think there's those immediate supports that need to keep that need to stay there for a little bit while longer. I think what also our businesses have been saying to us in the short term is, the Canada Emergency Relief Subsidy or a benefit for people has been a big factor as well. How do we transition now as we gear up our business again? We're looking to reopen, restart, but people are like, well, I'm actually making a little bit more money on the CERB, so I'm just going to keep doing that for the time being. Versus, it might be a restaurant that I can bring someone back for a few hours a week. Maybe it'll push them over that $1,000 they're allowed to make, and then they get kicked off of that benefit. So there's some conversations there that need to be happening to give business the certainty they know they can bring back their employees and they can actually rehire them. And then of course, that's once we get those kinds of things dealt with, I think then we start to get into more of what's the short-term stimulus that we can start applying to spur economic growth, and what is the longer term vision stuff that will actually keep us on that path to prosperity.
Given that you've got a pan-provincial survey that you can undertake here, do you notice distinct differences, say, between larger centers like Vancouver, Victoria, Kelowna, and a lot of the more rural businesses that we have?
Yeah, we definitely see some. I think there's an underlying commonality in the issues that businesses are all suffering some sort of form of revenue loss, decreased business, loss of contract. It's the same. Whether you're in a rural community or an urban center. Even something similar, like we talk about property tax. It's obviously something that's paid in every municipality throughout BC. And it's a slightly different issue depending on if you're in a more rural community versus urban. So, for instance, in a small town, there's that one major mill or large industry player that is usually the anchor of that community, and they see a property tax rate that's anywhere from 37. If you're a major industrial player, 37 times the residential rate. But even for commercial businesses out in the rural communities, their commercial rate is 3 to 4 times that of the resident. So it's just those little things out there that, it's a higher tax bill they have to pay. And of course, with decreased revenue, property tax is property taxes based on assessment. So you have to pay that whether it's good times or bad times. In urban centers, it's more that best and highest use value, right? You're that single shop, single story shop, a bakery, a clothes store, and you're rezoned to be a 40-story tower in the future for residents. Well, because of best and highest use property value, you're getting taxed at that higher rate. So,
Yes.
So again, at a time where it was already an issue that was increasing the tax bill 2 to 3 times what a business probably should be paying, it's only even more exacerbated today because of the fact that those revenues are so decreased for business.
So when the chamber began to look at the kinds of recommendations it wanted to map out, and as I say, there are 54 of them, but I think there's probably about a dozen in there, was the approach to try to provide almost like a clean sheet on some of the long-standing business concerns with, say, the tax code and policy code, or were you trying to basically create a pandemic response, a specific pandemic response here?
Yeah, I would say it's probably fair. We were trying to do a little bit of both. I think what our major point is, we have an opportunity here before us. And one of the things that our earlier data points were saying before the pandemic, it wasn't actually really rosy for business. A lot of business leading up to the pandemic, before the pandemic,
Yes.
were already starting to feel a pinch because of the added burden of cost, whether in the form of taxation or regulation. And so only 1 in 2, 1 in 2 businesses actually thought or felt their business was worse off than a year before. So,
well, we thought we were also getting toward the end of the economic cycle, right? That maybe we were actually going to approach a recession anyway, or at least some kind of downturn.
No, that's exactly it, Kirk. That's what our data was showing us, and so we were trying to say to government beforehand, we need to kind of get ahead of this, because we were kind of feeling, from a business point of view, at least feeling we were driving towards a cliff a bit. So obviously that's just now been exacerbated by the pandemic. So one of the things that we wanted to do with this plan was to say, hey, we can't go back to the uncompetitive nature before. It's not just going back to the way it was before, because there was a few issues we had to deal with there. So this is a chance to do a complete, almost reset. And that's where, again, talking about, what's that last one big form of taxation relief that we haven't got to yet? Well, it's a value-added tax that allows business to recoup all those taxes they pay for their inputs along the value chain and get that money back so that they can then reinvest it, whether it's back into their business to make their business more productive or back into their employees so they can pay them more money. So those are some of the things where we wanted to be mindful of what the situation was before the pandemic, but also create a roadmap on how we can help navigate the current situation we're in.
What I hear from business leaders, though, is a bit of ambivalence about perhaps the course of action that might be taken by senior levels of government in terms of really pivoting the entire economy. That is, trying to create a greener solution to the pandemic's throes than say might have been possible, say 8 months ago or a year ago. Um, has the chamber taken a bit of a position on this, and how much of a swing there needs to be in terms of that investment into those kinds of technologies and that kind of activity, as opposed to trying to reclaim a bit of the past?
Yeah, and that's always the balancing act with I think our economy. The BC Chamber has always been mindful of future opportunity, but we're never losing sight of the fact that we are a resource economy. That's the foundation that, that resource economy, whether it's mining, forestry, or even the new industry of LNG. We're going to basically build a house that is that emerging economy of clean tech, clean energy, other clean forms, or sorry, what they would call, I guess, a green economy. So we want to basically be mindful of the fact that under our let's compete category, we need to take care of our resource industry. But at the same time, we also recognize there is an opportunity to look at some targeted investments, especially in our clean energy sector, where we have a lot of great companies, whether it's Intergex, or Westport Innovation or Ballard Power. So there is some opportunity for us to maybe make some wise and smart choices there that allows us to green our economy, green our environment, and also create some economic job opportunity at the same time. But we never lose sight of the fact that we are still a resource economy.
Yeah, and that there need to be proportional levels of assistance into each facet of it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some of the specifics of your recommendations. I mean, you start off with the fact that small businesses really do want to compete better than they have been able to, and to bring back good jobs. What are the methods in order to do that, in your view?
So again, it's, I think, starting off with the fundamentals of competition and being competitive is making sure you have the tax structure in place. We definitely know we're hindered in a global economy. I think even in a Canadian economy, as one of the only jurisdictions that still has an antiquated provincial sales tax that doesn't allow the business to recoup those taxes they pay, whether if you're a manufacturer and you need to buy a certain widget, or you need to buy a piece of machinery to make your business more productive, you don't get those credits back. So that's one big piece of it.
Are you in with the BC Business Council that's looking at more of a value-added tax surfacing at some point?
Yeah, definitely. So that was one that we've both been aligned on for quite a while. I know us at the BC Chamber, we basically, from the day that the HST was defeated, which is a debate we don't want to go back to. Government keeps telling us it's never going to happen.
And believe me, I don't think any politician wants to take that one up.
Exactly. But it goes back to Kirk. It's the opportunity we have now where, and even in the middle of a pandemic, we're not necessarily thinking, you're going to flip the switch tomorrow and have a value-added tax. It does require a conversation. It's a conversation the BC Chamber is actually really well positioned to have, because we do represent every size of business and every sector of the economy and every region of the province. So let's figure that piece out over the next couple of years. In the short term, let's remove all PST on machinery, equipment, and technology. That's a big boost for whether you're in the forest industry, if you're a manufacturer, if you're say a small business restaurant, you need to buy that new grill or a new freezer or something like that. On those kinds of things, if you can get some of that PST back, it starts to mimic the value-added tax and allows them to get more money back into their pockets, which they can reinvest, whether it's to continue to grow or to bring and restaff their employees.
There's always a bit of a debate that takes place in our economy about, do you go big or do you actually go small in order to basically assist recovery? In this case, you're dealing with small businesses on the other hand, but also there are these other options around giant infrastructure projects, transportation projects in particular, bridges, any number of things that are basically very good for jobs over a period of time, but take a bit of time to get going. Aren't going to be necessarily enlisting people by year's end, for instance. What's the balance that you were trying to create here in your recommendations too, about what to proceed with?
Yeah, and this is again the great thing about being the BC Chamber and our network. Our local chambers have a good pulse on what are all the major infrastructure projects that could really help drive their local economies and drive the provincial economy. I think this is where one of the things, back, in 2008, when we had the last Great Recession, there was definitely a great effort to get infrastructure dollars out the door faster. And we definitely want to see that happening. And the standard was shovel-ready projects. Yeah. One of the things that we're looking at a little bit more closely this year and this time around is not just shovel-ready, but shovel-worthy projects. Mm-hmm. So again, Massey Tunnel here in the Metro Vancouver area, the Taylor Bridge up in the northeast, and then rail infrastructure along the island. And the beauty of this is because our economy is 75 to 80% service oriented, even if you advance a shovel-worthy project, that actually creates opportunity right away in some of those service industries, whether you're an environmental engineer or some sort of survey company, or you do some sort of service, financial servicing, portion. So you can get a lot of those pieces as you figure out, is this the right project to advance? And then once you get to that point that it is shovel ready, then you kick into another gear of economic recovery where now you got shovels in the ground and all those construction jobs. And that's where we want to make sure that, some projects are a little bit more shovel ready, like the Massey Tunnel. We could probably if we can just get a decision tomorrow, we can actually get some shovels going right now. But some of these other projects, they're definitely shovel worthy. They'll grow the economy long-term because they're trade related. They're about moving people and goods more efficiently, not just within BC, but across Canada and around the world. So, but because we are such a service oriented, by focusing on those projects and getting those things lined up today, we create benefit in the short term, as well as potential benefit in the long run by the jobs of actually building those projects.
Now, of course, during the pandemic, it's not like the world stood still. It was very much almost into an induced coma around its economy, but lots of things happened. And of course, two things that I think are very close to home for us in British Columbia. One would be, of course, Indigenous reconciliation. And the second one would be diversity and inclusivity, and the need for really a change in the dynamic of leadership in business and operations of business. How do governments help business in this regard in the short term?
Yeah, in Indigenous reconciliation is definitely a big piece. For the BC Chamber, we were one of the first organizations out there that talked about implementing UNDRIP as legislation, and we're there. And it's going to be a long journey to figure out what that looks like and how it works, and it'll take a few agreements to actually get there. But and there's lots of great ideas. We were actually careful not to try to be overly prescriptive on that front in terms of bringing our Indigenous communities in, because there's many voices out there and many people that have good ideas. But one idea that definitely resonated with us was with the First Nations Major Projects Coalition around a revolving loan facility, something where the government can loan out money to Indigenous communities that want to get resource projects off the ground. So again, tying back into that resource economy as the foundation, and then how we bring our Indigenous communities in there to prosper and benefit from it as well as part of that reconciliation conversation. So that was just one idea that we wanted to make sure government was aware of without being overly prescriptive to the other ideas that are out there. Other ways, we want to make sure we're being inclusive, because there's many ways, in terms of making sure that we're supporting young entrepreneurs, because they've probably been one of the more hard hit groups. Childcare is another issue, because women have definitely been hard hit in the pandemic in terms of having to look after children who might not be able to go back to school or have childcare options. So we want to make sure, that we're supporting good childcare spaces, making sure there are spaces available. And of course, the benefit of that from a BC Chamber point of view is that a lot of those spaces are actually small business operators looking to make sure they're providing safe space. So if we can support those childcare spaces, we actually are also supporting small businesses. At the same time, we actually have been really open to the idea about accessibility, that there are a lot of people in our economy that want to work, that have physical disabilities, that might not be able to access the workplace to benefit their benefit based on their challenges. So there's a great short-term opportunity for construction jobs to, the government can help stimulate by saying to people, okay, if you're a business and you want to make your business more accessible, go ahead and do it. We'll basically help finance that through a grant of some sort. And then of course, the longer term benefit is now we have workspaces that are more accessible, so that when we do have that full recovery take hold post-pandemic or at some point in the future, then we can get some of those people back into our workforce as well, who would be a tremendous benefit to businesses.
Yeah, we haven't got time, I guess, to pour through all elements of the report, but I want to take one last look at the bigger picture, which is, what you think the conditions need to be in order for us to restore this mixture of business and consumer confidence. look again at the work of the Conference Board of Canada today and talking about consumer confidence starting to wane again. What are the conditions you think that are necessary for governments to help put in place so that businesses can have greater confidence and therefore consumers can feel like they're going to be in good straits too?
Yeah, certainty, understanding the rules. I think, you were touching a little bit, we don't know what the future holds with a second wave and what that could mean. We are starting to see our numbers uptick again. So businesses understanding how they can offer safe places to do business so people feel confident to come out. Because that's obviously a big key is, and I think obviously a little bit of understanding is in there as well. Because I know, our members like SayUp and Kamloops, they're working so hard to provide a safe spot and try to follow the provincial health officers' regulations. And some people are obviously feeling, pushing back about having to wear masks or other things like that. So just obviously a little bit of understanding for our business operators, but understanding kind of what they need to do to provide that safe piece or safe place of business is a key, so that people can feel comfortable knowing if I go to my favorite local restaurant or my favorite small business, I can kind of put my money in there and know that it's safe for me to be there and safe for those employees. I think at the same time for business, it's understanding, how we're going to wind down some of these support projects, knowing the fact that, there are added costs to doing business these days. So government needs to know, we can't necessarily layer, in the form of more taxation, or if we can relieve a little bit of that tax burden on business, the regulatory burden, help support them as they upscale their business with PPE so that they can open safely. And I think that's a key as well, because like typical, whether you're a small business operator or even a person, a resident, if you don't feel certain as you get some of these checks coming in, some of these supports, if you don't feel like there is a safe and an economy that's working, your general inclination is to put that in your pocket and save it, versus what we need to have people doing right now is feel they can get out into the economy. They can spend at their ice cream shop or their restaurant or clothes store. And that then has all those indirect and induced benefits that go along with it as well.
Yeah. Last question. So you submitted your report on the 21st of July, released it publicly this week. How soon do you think we can expect to see something from the province in the way of a recovery plan?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kirk. I think why we wanted to kind of get out now is obviously just to show as we head into the fall that there is local chambers throughout British Columbia thinking about these things, thinking about their members, and making sure that we're getting these ideas into government. I would hope that we're looking at some time in the fall that this will be released, because more information, more certainty sooner rather than later definitely goes back to that piece about how do we make people feel confident about the recovery and that businesses are operating and people can spend their money. But again, these are just being sensitive to the fact these are different times, and I don't think anyone has ever experienced anything like this. So getting it right is definitely the key, and knowing the fact if we have to spend maybe beyond that 1.5 billion to get the right mix of supports for business to get that economy off to the right start, that restart off to the right start, and making it a lasting recovery, not just a temporary recovery. I think from that point of view, we at the business community, or at least at the BC Chamber, are willing to give it a little bit more time. But sooner rather than later is definitely appreciated, just with the fact that we want to make sure people, especially as we head into the fall with maybe a second wave, know that that we got a hand on this tiller and that we're going to help the recovery get going quicker.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty comprehensive report. I'd encourage people to see it at your site at the BC Chamber of Commerce. Meanwhile, Dan, good talking to you. Stay well.
Thanks, Kirk. You too.
Dan Baxter is the Chamber of Commerce's BC Director of Policy Development and Government and Stakeholder Relations. I'm Kirk LaPointe, Publisher and Editor-in-Chief at BIV. Thanks for watching BIV Daily. We'll see you again.